What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade. But today is another reboot, and we are going to be talking about dating violence. A story called Loved to Death, Lauren Dunne-Astley. Let's just dive right in. Lauren Dunne-Astley was born on April 1st, 1993, and she was an Aries. Lauren's parents are named Mary and Malcolm, and she was born in Boston, Massachusetts. She was the only child and the absolute love of her parents' lives. You can tell how much they loved and adored her just by the way they speak about her. Though born in Boston, Lauren grew up in Wayland, Massachusetts, and her parents were both educators but divorced in 2006. They shared custody of her. Lauren discovered a love of and talent for music at a very early age. At the age of 12, she got the lead in a community theater production of Annie. She was so incredibly talented. She was a natural. She loved the spotlight. Lauren was only 5 foot tall, but according to everyone who knew her, she had a larger than life, a giant personality. Lauren was also very talented at soccer and tennis. She played the French horn and performed with the Metro West New Symphony Orchestra for several years, and she had this incredibly amazing singing voice. She was the lead singer of her high school's a cappella group. Her loved ones described Lauren as vibrant and full of life, an incredibly honest young woman with a huge heart who wasn't afraid to stand up for what she believed in, to stand up for the little guy. She definitely wasn't any kind of wallflower or little mouse keeping silent in the corner. If she had something to say, she was going to say it. If she believed in something, she stood up for it. My kind of girl. When I see pictures of Lauren myself, I just can't help but smile. She wasn't only beautiful to look at, you could just see this light in her eyes and this gorgeous, perfect smile that emanates this real happiness and joy in life at just 18 years old. Lauren went 3 times to New Orleans to help flood victims from Hurricane Katrina get back on their feet. Her parents stated that the good, hard manual labor was very good for her, but also really meaningful to her. She really enjoyed it, and she never complained about it. It was something she wanted to do. Lauren eventually started dating fellow classmate Nathaniel Fujita. They were both each other's first serious relationship. When describing Nathaniel, his and Lauren's friends described him as a quiet person who really didn't say much, and also a, quote, good friend and a kind person at heart, end quote. Nathaniel, or Nate, as he was mostly called, was a star wide receiver for the Wayland High School football team. He was the oldest child to his parents, Beth and Tomo Fujita. Tomo was a musician, a well-known guitarist whose music you can find on YouTube, and he was also a professor at Berklee College of Music in Boston, Massachusetts. Their families became very close while they were dating, and each family just loved the other child. They all got along together really well, and both sets of parents thought the relationship was a really good match. Lauren and Nate, as usually do with your first love, your first boyfriend or girlfriend, they spent so much time together, usually hanging out with their mutual friends or at Nate's house. The two dated for about 3 years, and the first 2 years were described as ideal by everyone who knew them. But the third and final year was when it kind of became a roller coaster ride. I couldn't find specific information or details as to what changed in the last year, but Lauren would complain to friends that one night that Nate was being boring and on his phone the entire time, and then the next night she would talk about how cute he was and how romantic and how much she loved him. So it was kind of an up and down relationship, definitely. Lauren's mother explained in an interview that the two kept chronically getting into fights just to turn around and almost immediately get back together again. This kept happening over and over again, and Lauren and Nate were both very miserable about it. In the spring of senior year, on her 18th birthday in April, Lauren broke it off with Nate for good. She was looking forward to college and going away and getting to meet so many new people and experience so many new things to move on from this first relationship that obviously was not working out for her anymore. According to friends and family, she was relieved with the breakup. Nathaniel, however, did not see the breakup in the same way. He was extremely sad, and he was reported to have felt a real sense of loss when Lauren broke up with him. He couldn't seem to really move past it or even accept that it was real. He believed that Lauren would come back to him as she did every other time, and this really had an effect on him mentally. Nathaniel had been accepted to play football for Trinity come fall, and he couldn't even get excited about that. It was a childhood dream come true. His uncle said, quote, "He just wasn't the same kid not to get excited about football," end quote. To celebrate graduation, Lauren and two of her best friends, Chloe and Hannah, decided to throw a party, and about 150 classmates showed up. All of them were having a great time. They were dancing and celebrating underneath this huge event tent. I guess because of all the harassment and anger Nate had been displaying towards Lauren from the time she broke up with him in April leading up to this graduation party, even though he was there that night, Lauren did not want to talk to him at all. She didn't even want to say hi. She just wanted to enjoy her time with her friends and enjoy her graduation party. According to friends and witnesses at the party, they stated that Nate, seemingly drunk and possibly high, went up to Lauren and started a huge fight with her that night underneath the tent in front of everybody. They recalled how upset Lauren had become and how she was just pleading with Nate to just get away from her and leave her alone, to just get away from her. Lauren's mother also shared a memory from that same night, stating that Lauren had come to her crying, saying that Nate was harassing her, wouldn't leave her alone, and was refusing to allow her to dance with anybody else. I don't know how he was doing this, maybe kind of pulling her away or cutting in, or he wasn't letting her dance with anybody else. When Lauren wasn't being responsive the way Nate wanted her to be, she just kept telling him to leave her alone. He got extremely angry, and he walked over to one of the poles that was holding the tent up and punched it, and it made it kind of halfway collapse down onto some of the party goers, who were then forced to try and hold the tent back up. At this point, Nate was asked by Lauren's parents to please leave, and Lauren's father said, quote, "He had to be picked up, and I think feeling like the world was against him at that time," end quote. In the few weeks leading up to Lauren's murder, everybody noticed a huge change in Nathaniel. He never left his house anymore and was drinking and smoking pot daily. He wasn't hanging out with his friends anymore either. His mother, Beth, was so worried about him that she took him to see a psychiatrist. Lauren continued to worry about Nate, and she always was asking friends, like, should I go see him? Should I go talk to him? She loved him and cared about him, and she didn't want to see him hurting or hurt in any way or sad. She just couldn't continue on with the romantic relationship anymore. Her friends all advised her not to go and see him because he could take it the wrong way and think that she was trying to get back together with him, only to end up being disappointed and hurt all over again. So she kind of worried about it to herself and with her friends, but she did not approach Nathaniel about it. However, Beth, Nate's mom, went to Lauren's job and asked her to please go and talk to Nate to see him. She was really worried about him, and Lauren felt like she couldn't turn down Nate's mom. She had been like a second mother to her during the relationship for the 3 years, and they were really close. And plus, like I said, she was already worried and already kind of thinking about going. So when Beth asked her to go, she said that she would that night when she left work. When her shift ended at the clothing store on the night of July 3rd, 2011. There is video surveillance of Lauren on the phone while leaving the mall, and records showed later that she was in fact talking to Nate, and this was at around 6:45 p.m. Lauren didn't tell anybody, none of friends, not her family, that she was going to meet Nate. She told nobody, but the surveillance footage of her leaving the mall at 6:45 was the last anyone would see her alive. At 7:05 p.m. on that same night, July 3rd, 2011, Lauren's phone sent out its very last ever text message, and it was one word and sent to Nathaniel Fujita. It said, quote, "Here," end quote. At about dawn on July 4th, 2011, Lauren had been missing for about 12 hours. Everyone knew that she was missing, and her family had called police at around daybreak. Lauren's body was found in a nearby marsh. She had been strangled, and her throat had been cut. She had a bungee cord tangled in her hair. Dunne-Astley, Lauren's father, had to go and do the unthinkable. He had to go to identify the body of his only child, his beloved daughter. He said about the experience, quote, "I was hoping up until the last moment that it was not her, even when we went to the medical examiner's office," end quote. Lauren's mother remembers just screaming, quote, "Please don't let it be Nate," end quote. Investigators interviewed family and friends and obviously wanted to speak to Nathaniel Fujita. They learned that on the previous night, Nate was home alone, but when they went to the Fujita home, Nate's father, Tomo, told them that Nate was also missing and he hadn't seen him. Investigators immediately got a warrant for the Fujita home. They started their search of the residence in the garage, where they found a stain that resembled and was later tested positive to be human blood. They also uncovered additional blood evidence, bungee cords that matched the one that was in Lauren's hair, and in the basement of a home, a black gym bag. Inside the gym bag was a soaking wet pair of sneakers that were covered in mud. When they searched Nathaniel's bedroom, though, that's when it all came together. In a crawl space in his bedroom, the police found sneakers that appeared to have blood all over them, bloody clothing, and everything was soaking wet and covered in mud. Now, with this information, keep in mind, Lauren's body was discovered in a marsh, a wet, muddy marshland. This is when the investigators issued a warrant for Nathaniel Fujita himself, and they tracked him down at a cousin's house. When they arrived, put the handcuffs on him and told him why they were arresting him, what they were there for, he was silent. He said absolutely nothing. He was arrested immediately and charged with the murder of Lauren Dunne-Astley. About the arrest, Nate's uncle said, quote, "It was incomprehensible. It was like an alternate reality," end quote. Here is the timeline the prosecutors put together based on all of the evidence they had uncovered. The blood found in the garage and on Nate's clothes was Lauren's as well, just so you guys know. Nate was home alone when Lauren showed up just a few minutes after 7 on July 3rd. He savagely and brutally murdered her in his parents' garage, and then he drove her red Jeep about a quarter mile to the Town Beach parking lot, dumped her keys in a storm drain, and then ran on foot back to his house. He went back to his garage, put Lauren's dead body into his own car, and then drove about 5 miles to a secluded marsh area. He took her body out of the car and went about 30 feet into the marshy water and tried to conceal her body with some vegetation that was springing up in this, muddy marsh. Then he headed back home. A witness saw him on a street coming from the marsh back to his house and said, quote, "His music was blaring and his shirt was off. He looked like he was on a mission, deliberate and purposeful driving," end quote. When he got back to his house, he tried to clean up the crime scene and hide evidence. Quote, "It all took less than an hour," end quote, prosecutors said. The prosecution in this case sums up a very singular and simple theory as to why Nate killed Lauren. Quote, "He was upset his girlfriend broke up with him, so he killed her," end quote. Is it ever really that simple, though? By all accounts, there was no physical abuse, no stalking behavior going on during the couple's 3-year relationship. However, some of their friends said they did see some things and some behaviors that they considered to be a bit troubling even then. They said Nate didn't ever want Lauren talking to anybody else, especially male friends. He didn't want her hanging out with anybody when he wasn't there, and he would randomly pick up her phone and go through it and question her. Who are you talking to? Why are you talking to them? Etc., etc. Lauren's best friend Chloe later stated, quote, "I believe he loved her. He was obsessed with her," end quote. As authorities started gathering more information leading up to the trial, they started to believe that Lauren was a victim of something called dating violence. It's a disturbing trend that's happening more and more in the relationships and breakups of young people, especially high school teenagers or high school aged teenagers. Quote, "A relationship ends and what happens is a surge of uncontrollable anger. It can be verbal and or physical, and in the case of Lauren Astley, it can end in death," end quote. According to the American Psychological Association, 1 in 3 young adults and teens are the victims of physical, emotional, verbal, and or sexual abuse by a dating partner. That's some scary statistics right there. Of teenagers that are in an abusive relationship, 3% will tell an authority figure, 6% will tell a family member, but 79% will tell a friend. Mary Dunn explains that while now she realizes that she did see some signs of a toxic relationship, they weren't blaring. They were, quote, "very, very soft," end quote. She stated it was things that she just chalked up to regular teenage behavior, hormones, the fact that Lauren's best friends didn't like him, and how much time they spent hanging out at Nate's house compared to how much time they spent hanging out at Lauren's house. Those things now, in retrospect, cause her some concern. Quote, and the number of times she tried to break up with him and he wouldn't allow it. I think that is another red flag, end quote. Absolutely. In my opinion, how is somebody not going to allow you to break up with them? Nobody has that kind of control over another human being. According to Nate's family, there was something else going on with him. He reported to a psychiatrist that 1 out of 10, with 10 being the best mood ever and 1 being the worst, he was at a 1. Now let's talk a bit about the trial. On February 13th, 2013, about a year and a half after the murder of Lauren, Nate stood trial for her murder. The prosecutor believed that Nate punching the pole of the event tent at the graduation party was a precursor to the murder event. Quote, this is a domestic violence murder. This was perpetrated because of the relationship, which was a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, end quote. However, the defense vehemently denied this and disagreed with it, stating that this was way more than a domestic violence murder. It just wasn't that cut and dry. They wanted the jury to focus on Nate's behavior overall in total leading up to Lauren's murder after graduation. The psychiatrist his mother took him to see diagnosed him with major clinical depression, and Nate refused to take the medication. Remember, he was also drinking alcohol and smoking pot daily. His attorney stated, quote, he has major mental illness. This isn't just feeling down, but this was a major depressive episode, end quote. Lauren's best friend Chloe said that Lauren was concerned that Nate was going to hurt himself, and that's what his mother feared. Everybody feared he was going to hurt himself. They never imagined he would ever hurt Lauren. Nathaniel's attorney stated, quote, at the time of the killing, Nathaniel lapsed into a temporary psychotic episode that prevented him from controlling his actions or comprehending what he was doing, end quote. The defense is that Nathaniel is not criminally responsible at the time of the incident because of major mental illness. Quote, the defense, I would ask you to consider, is one of lack of criminal responsibility, end quote. Essentially, the insanity plea, right? Nathaniel's attorney, Bill Sullivan, called for the defense an expert psychiatrist who had evaluated Nate after Lauren's murder named Wade Myers. When asked what Nathaniel had told him happened that night when Lauren had arrived at the house, Nathaniel allegedly told him that they began walking towards the garage to talk and he had grabbed this bungee cord and put it around her neck and began strangling her. He said he wasn't in control of himself. It was like his body was acting while his mind was disconnected from itself. So essentially it was like he was watching himself do this, like an out-of-body experience. Dr. Myers also testified as to what Nathaniel had described to him about slitting Lauren's throat. And he testified, quote, again, describing not being in control of what he was doing, no emotional connection to what was happening, end quote. So hopefully you get the essence of this trial. I can go on and on and on, but I want to focus on one moment. One beautiful moment that happened in the courtroom right after it was read that Nathaniel Fujita was found guilty and would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was found guilty of murder in the first degree with deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity or cruelty. Lauren's father, Malcolm Astley, walked across the courtroom and hugged Nathaniel's crying parents. He later said, quote, trying to hold people responsible for situations that are murky and we don't understand very well, and trying to sort out the matter of mental health and how it applies in this case, end quote. When asked about the hug, he said, quote, I was mainly sharing grief and wishing comfort for them in the ongoing horror that they face. They are facing ongoing, equivalent to torture for their son for the rest of his life, end quote. In response, Nate's uncle said of that amazing gesture of grace and compassion from one grieving father to another, quote, he is perhaps the most generous human being I have ever met, end quote, as tears streamed down his face. I cried when I saw this moment. If I can find a clip of it that I'm able to use, I'll put it in. Guys, that's all I have for you today. This was a very short but extremely tragic case. It was one of the first 3 or 4 that I covered, And I thought it was a pretty good video, but I just wanted to do it again. Like I said, I'm redoing all of them, so bear with me. I really don't feel well. I know I seem like myself, but if you look at this, like I've been sleeping, I feel like absolute crap. So forgive like the poor lighting. I don't look so good. I feel self-conscious. That's not fishing for compliments. Anyway, guys, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Share it if you think it's worth sharing. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'm getting closer and closer to 1,000. Also, please check out some important links in the description box. The link to become a patron. Right now, I do early access videos and little shorty videos. Once I get more patrons, I will be able to do Patreon-only content way more often. Thank you so much to my beautiful patrons right now and everyone who's donated through PayPal. That's the other link that you will find in the description box, the link to my PayPal to make a one-time donation if you don't want a monthly recurring. I will do my best to give you access to any Patreon-only content when you donate through PayPal as well. Also, while we've been on hiatus for quite a while, we're writing the book, we've got the live stream going, we have so much going on. Steve Stockton and I, there will be linked to our podcast, Strange Things with Steve Stockton and Gemma Jade, also in the description box. Check it out. Within the next month or so, we will have more content for our podcast. So, Crime Bomb with Gemma Jade, the audio-only podcast with merch, is coming very soon, guys. Steve's working hard on it, and I just can't wait to get this book out. So, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Lauren's story and to hear just a fraction of information about breakup and or dating violence. Guys, have your best day, have your best night. Be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything. Let your kindness show. It's beautiful. Bye-bye. Mwah.